What happens when a Hollywood comeback meets daytime television's most outspoken host? Today, we're diving into one of the most explosive moments in recent talk show history. When Lindsay Lohan sat down with the Views panel, only to find herself in a heated battle of words with Joy Behar that ended with the actress storming off set. This isn't your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how personal boundaries and public perception collide in the most uncomfortable way possible. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below because this story has layers that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about celebrity interviews. The studio lights were blazing as Lindsay Lohan walked onto the View set, her red hair catching the overhead beams as she settled into the guest chair. The audience applauded warmly, a mix of nostalgic fans and curious onlookers eager to hear from the actress who had been making headlines for her recent projects and personal transformation. Whoopi Goldberg opened with the standard pleasantries, welcoming Lindsay back to American television after her years abroad. The conversation started smoothly enough, with Sarah N. asking about her new Netflix projects and Sunny Hostin inquiring about her life in Dubai. Lindsay seemed comfortable, even charming, as she discussed her business ventures and how motherhood had changed her perspective on life. But then Joy Behar leaned forward, that familiar gleam in her eye that regular viewers know means trouble is coming. "Lindsay, I have to ask," Joy began, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserves for her most pointed questions. "You've had quite the journey, haven't you? I mean, we all remember the courthouse visits, the rehab stints, the, shall we say, colorful period of your 20s. The studio fell silent. You could practically feel the tension shift as Lindsay's smile faltered slightly. She maintained her composure, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she hadn't expected this direct of an approach so early in the interview. "Well, Joy, that was a long time ago," Lindsay replied, her voice measured but with a slight edge. "I think we all grow and learn from our experiences. I'm in a completely different place in my life now." Joy nodded, but she wasn't finished. "Oh, absolutely, and I think that's wonderful. But you have to understand, for those of us who watched it all unfold, it was quite the spectacle. The paparazzi photos, the legal troubles, I mean, you were essentially a walking reality show for a while there." The other hosts shifted uncomfortably. Whoopi cleared her throat as if to redirect, but Joy was on a roll now. "I'm just curious," Joy continued, "do you ever look back at that time and think, wow, what was I thinking? Because from the outside, it looked like someone who was completely out of control." Lindsay's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Joy, with all due respect, I think reducing someone's lowest moments to entertainment is pretty harsh. Those were real struggles I was dealing with, not a performance for anyone's amusement." "But Lindsay," Joy pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension, "you have to admit, you put yourself in the public eye. You courted that attention. The late-night partying, the very public relationships, the arrests, I mean. You were practically begging for the spotlight." That's when something shifted in Lindsay's demeanor. Her publicist, sitting just off camera, looked visibly concerned as Lindsay straightened in her chair. "Begging for the spotlight," Lindsay repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Joy, I was a teenager when I became famous. A child, actually. And yes, I made mistakes, but I was dealing with addiction, family issues, and the pressure of growing up in front of the entire world. To say I was begging for negative attention is not only wrong, it's cruel." The audience was dead silent now. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away. Joy, however, appeared energized by the pushback. "Oh, come on, Lindsay. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm being realistic. You had every advantage, every opportunity, and you threw it all away. For what? Parties and drama. There are thousands of young actresses who would have killed for your chances." Lindsay's hands were gripping the arms of her chair now. "Threw it all away. Joy, I'm sitting here promoting my new projects. I have a successful business. I'm happily married with a child. How exactly did I throw anything away?" "Well, let's be honest," Joy said with a dismissive wave. "Your career never really recovered, did it? I mean, when was the last time you had a major movie role? A real one, not some Netflix thing." The words hung in the air like a slap. Lindsay's face went through a series of emotions, shock, hurt, and then something much harder. "Some Netflix thing." Lindsay's voice was dangerously quiet now. "Joy, do you realize how insulting that is? Not just to me, but to everyone who worked on those projects. To the platform that gave me a chance when Hollywood had written me off." Sunny tried to jump in. "Lindsay, I think what Joy meant was..." "No," Lindsay cut her off, her eyes never leaving Joy's face. "I know exactly what she meant. She meant that I'm damaged goods, that anything I do now is somehow less than because of my past, that I should be grateful for scraps because I made mistakes as a teenager." Joy leaned back, perhaps finally realizing she had pushed too far, but her response only made things worse. "Lindsay, you're being overly dramatic. I'm just asking the questions our viewers want answered." "Overly dramatic." Lindsay stood up, her microphone still clipped to her shirt. "Joy, You just spent 10 minutes dissecting the worst period of my life like it was a comedy routine, dismissed my current work as worthless, and suggested I deserved everything that happened to me because I was, what, asking for it? The other hosts were frantically trying to regain control. Whoopi attempted to speak, but the studio audience was holding its collective breath as Lindsay Lohan stood there, her chest rising and falling with barely contained anger. Joy Behar, for perhaps the first time in her career, seemed genuinely speechless, her mouth opening and closing without any words coming out. You know what, Joy? Lindsay's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Let me tell you what really happened during those years you're so fascinated by. I was 19 years old, making millions of dollars, with no real guidance, no real support system, and everyone around me telling me I was invincible. I was prescribed medication for anxiety that I became dependent on. I was drinking to cope with the pressure, and I was surrounded by people who only cared about me as long as I was making them money. Joy finally found her voice. But Lindsay, personal responsibility, personal responsibility. Lindsay's laugh was bitter. Joy, when you were 19, what was the worst thing that happened to you? Did you have photographers following you to the bathroom? Did you have every mistake you made broadcast on national television? Did you have grown adults making jokes about your pain on late-night television? The camera caught Joy's face, and for the first time, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. Lindsay, I'm not trying to minimize your struggles, but you have to understand, when you're in the public eye, you accept certain responsibilities. You become a role model whether you want to or not. A role model. Lindsay's voice was incredulous. Now Joy, I was a teenager. I was supposed to be a role model while I was still figuring out who I was. While I was dealing with my parents' very public divorce, my father's legal troubles, and trying to navigate an industry that chews people up and spits them out. Sarah N. tried desperately to redirect. Lindsay, maybe we could talk about your new projects, how you've moved forward, but Lindsay was past the point of polite redirection. No, Sarah, I appreciate that. But Joy clearly has something she needs to get off her chest. So let's do this. Joy, what exactly do you want from me? An apology, shame, self-flagellation for the entertainment of your audience. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras. Joy shifted in her seat, clearly realizing this had spiraled far beyond what she had intended. Lindsay, I think you're misunderstanding my intent. Your intent. Lindsay stepped closer to the table, her voice rising. Your intent was to humiliate me on national television. Your intent was to drag me back to the lowest point of my life and parade it around for ratings. Don't pretend this was some kind of journalistic integrity, Joy. This was a hit job. Whoopi Goldberg, veteran of countless difficult interviews, tried to take control. Okay, let's all take a breath here. No, Whoopi, Lindsay said, turning to address her directly. I have enormous respect for you, but I'm not taking a breath. I came here in good faith to talk about my work, my growth, my family. And instead, I got ambushed by someone who apparently thinks my teenage mistakes are more interesting than my adult accomplishments. Joy's face was red now, whether from embarrassment or anger, it was hard to tell. Lindsay, you're completely overreacting. These are standard questions. Standard questions. Lindsay's voice cracked with disbelief. Joy, show me one other interview where you've spent 15 minutes dissecting someone's teenage mistakes before they're even allowed to talk about why they're here. Show me one other time you've dismissed someone's current work as meaningless because of their past. The silence stretched on, as Joy clearly couldn't provide such an example. Lindsay nodded, as if expecting exactly that response. That's what I thought, Lindsay continued. You know what the real irony is? You spend every day on this show talking about how society treats women unfairly, how we're judged more harshly than men, how we're not allowed to make mistakes without being defined by them forever. And yet here you are, doing exactly that too. Me, Joy's defense mechanism kicked in, and she fell back on sarcasm. Oh, so now I'm the villain because I asked some tough questions. Tough questions. Lindsay's composure finally cracked completely. Joy, you asked me if I ever looked back and think, what was I thinking? You told me I was begging for attention when I was struggling with addiction. You dismissed my current work as some Netflix thing and suggested my career never recovered. Those aren't tough questions. Those are character assassinations disguised as journalism. The other co-hosts were looking increasingly desperate. Sunny Hostin made another attempt. I think there might be some miscommunication here. There's no miscommunication. Lindsay cut her off. Joy made herself very clear. She thinks I'm a cautionary tale, a has-been who should be grateful for whatever scraps I can get because I made mistakes as a teenager. Well, let me tell you something, Joy. I don't owe you or anyone else shame about my past. I've done the work, I've made amends where necessary, and I've built a life I'm proud of. Joy, perhaps sensing she was losing control of the narrative, made one final attempt to justify her approach. Lindsay, I'm sorry if you feel attacked, but these are legitimate questions about your past behavior, My past behavior. Lindsay's voice was dangerously quiet again. Joy, let's talk about behavior. Is it appropriate behavior for a woman in her 70s to bully someone half her age on national television? Is it appropriate behavior to invite someone as a guest and then spend the entire interview trying to humiliate them? The accusation of bullying clearly stung Joy, and her response was sharp. Now you listen here, young lady, Lindsay repeated, her eyebrows raised. There it is. The condescension, the dismissiveness, you can't even see it, can you? You can't see how every word out of your mouth has been designed to put me in my place, to remind me that I'm damaged, that I'm less than, that I should be grateful you're even giving me airtime. Joy's face was now a deep red. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by someone who what? Lindsay interrupted, her voice like ice, who made mistakes, who struggled, who survived. Because that's what I did. Joy, I survived. Despite people like you, who seem to think my pain is your entertainment. The tension in the room was suffocating. Crew members were visibly uncomfortable, some looking away from their monitors. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to applaud, gasp, or simply pretend they weren't witnessing. The microphone made a small thud as Lindsay placed it on the table, the sound echoing through the dead-silent studio. But instead of walking away immediately, she stood there for a moment, looking at each of the co-hosts in turn. You want to know what's really sad about this? Lindsay said, her voice now eerily calm. I actually used to watch this show. I used to admire what you all stood for. The conversations you had about women supporting women, about second chances, about not judging people by their worst moments. Whoopi looked genuinely pained. Lindsay, we do believe in those things, do you? Lindsay interrupted, but her tone wasn't angry anymore. It was almost philosophical. Because what I just experienced was the exact opposite of everything this show claims to represent. I sat here and watched a woman who calls herself a feminist systematically tear down another woman for entertainment. Joy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during Lindsay's microphone removal, suddenly found her voice again. Now wait just a minute. I am a feminist, and I've been fighting for women's rights longer than you've been alive. Lindsay's laugh was humorless. Fighting for women's rights. Joy, you just spent 20 minutes trying to shame me for struggling with addiction as a teenager. You dismissed my current accomplishments, questioned my worthiness for opportunities, and suggested I deserved the harassment I faced. If that's feminism, then the movement is in serious trouble. The accusation hit its mark. Joy's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. That's completely unfair. I never said you deserved harassment. You said I was asking for attention. Lindsay replied coolly. You said I courted the spotlight. You blamed me for the invasive coverage, the paparazzi stalking, the cruel commentary. How is that different from telling someone they were asking for it? The comparison to victim blaming landed like a bomb in the studio. You could see it in Joy's face, the moment she realized how her words could be interpreted. But instead of backing down, her defensiveness kicked into overdrive. That is a completely inappropriate comparison. Joy snapped. We're talking about career choices, not that, are we? Lindsay asked, tilting her head. Because from where I'm sitting, you spent this entire interview explaining why I deserved every bad thing that happened to me because of choices I made as a teenager. You told me my career never recovered, that my current work doesn't matter, that I threw away my chances. How is that not victim blaming? Sarah N., clearly desperate to restore some semblance of normalcy, jumped in. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Joy, maybe you could clarify what you meant. There's no misunderstanding, Lindsay said firmly. Joy meant exactly what she said. She thinks I'm a cautionary tale, a washed-up former child star who should be grateful for whatever scraps Hollywood throws my way. And you know what? That's fine. She's entitled to her opinion. But I don't have to sit here and listen to it disguised. As an interview, Joy's face was now a mottled red and white, her hand shaking slightly as she gripped her note cards. I never called you washed up, you didn't have to, Lindsay replied. When you dismiss someone's current work as some Netflix thing, when you suggest their career never recovered, when you spend more time talking about their failures than their successes, you're making your opinion pretty clear. The studio audience was completely silent now, many looking uncomfortable, some appearing to be on Lindsay's side. The tension was so thick it was almost visible. Sunny Hostin made one more attempt at damage control. Lindsay, I think we've gotten off track here. We really would love to hear about your new projects. Lindsay turned to Sunny with something that might have been genuine sadness. Sunny, I appreciate that. I really do. But the damage is done. Joy has made it clear that she's not interested in my new projects. She's not interested in my growth. She's not interested in anything except relitigating my past for the entertainment of your audience. Joy couldn't stay quiet any longer. That is absolutely not true. I ask tough questions of everyone. Do you? Lindsay's voice was sharp again. Joy, when Robert Downey Jr. comes on shows, do interviewers spend the entire time talking about his drug arrests? When Drew Barrymore appears somewhere, do they focus exclusively on her childhood struggles? Or do they talk about their comeback stories? their current projects, their growth. The comparison was devastating in its accuracy. Joy's mouth worked soundlessly as she clearly struggled to find a response. I'll tell you the difference, Lindsay continued, not waiting for an answer. They're men, or they're beloved in a way I never was. They get to be comeback stories. I get to be a cautionary tale. They get to be inspiring. I get to be a punchline. Whoopi, clearly recognizing the interview was beyond salvaging, made a final attempt. Lindsay, that's not how we see you, isn't it? Lindsay asked, and there was genuine pain in her voice. Now, Whoopi, I've been sitting here for 20 minutes being psychoanalyzed, judged, and dismissed. I've been told my work doesn't matter, that I never recovered from my mistakes, that I brought my struggles on myself. If that's not how you see me, then someone forgot to tell your co-host. The silence that followed was deafening. Joy looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. The other hosts looked mortified. The audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. Lindsay looked around the studio one more time, taking in the cameras, the lights, the faces staring back at her. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. You know what the real tragedy is? I came here excited to talk about my new projects, my family, the work I'm doing now. I came here hoping to have a real conversation about growth, about second chances, about how people can change. Instead, I got a masterclass in how women tear each other down in the name of entertainment. She paused, looking directly into the main camera. To anyone watching who's struggling, who's made mistakes, who's trying to rebuild their life, let me tell you something. Don't let people like this convince you that you're defined by your worst moments. Don't let them tell you that you don't deserve success because you stumbled along the way. And don't let them turn your pain into their punchline. Joy made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Lindsay, I think you're being incredibly unfair. Lindsay turned to look at Joy one final time, and her expression was almost pitying. Unfair. Joy, what's unfair is ambushing someone under the guise of an interview. What's unfair is spending more time on someone's teenage mistakes than their adult account. And with that, Lindsay Lohan turned and walked toward the edge of the set. But just as she reached the boundary between the interview area and the backstage zone, she stopped. The entire studio held its breath as she slowly turned back around. Actually, you know what? Lindsay said, her voice cutting through the silence. I have one more thing to say. She walked back toward the table, not to sit down, but to stand directly in front of Joy Behar. The camera caught every nuance of both women's expressions, Lindsay's determined and fierce, Joy's increasingly panicked. Joy, you asked me if I ever look back and think what was I thinking. Well, let me ask you something. When you go home tonight and watch this back, when you see how you treated someone who came here as your guest, when you see how you turned someone's pain into your entertainment, are you going to look back and think what was I thinking? Joy's face went through a series of emotions, confusion, anger, and what might have been the first glimmer of shame. Lindsay, I was just doing my job. Your job. Lindsay's voice was incredulous. Joy, your job is to interview guests, not to humiliate them. Your job is to have conversations, not to conduct character assassinations. Your job is to inform and entertain your audience, not to bully people for ratings. The words hit their mark. Joy visibly flinched at the word bully, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her note cards. I am not a bully, Joy said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then what would you call it? Lindsay asked, her tone almost conversational now. You invited me here as a guest, then spent the entire interview trying to shame me, dismiss me, and put me in my place. You interrupted me, talked over me, and refused to listen when I tried to redirect the conversation to why I'm actually here. If that's not bullying, what is? The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning became audible. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away from what had become less an interview than a reckoning. Whoopi Goldberg, clearly recognizing that this had spiraled completely out of control, made one final attempt at damage control. Lindsay, I think emotions are running high here. Maybe we should all take a moment. No, Whoopi, Lindsay said, not taking her eyes off Joy. I don't need a moment. I need Joy to understand something. I need her to understand that there's a human being sitting in that guest chair, not a character in some cautionary tale she's trying to tell. Lindsay's voice softened slightly, but it carried more power than when she'd been shouting. Joy, I was 19 when my life fell apart. In public, 19, I was barely out of high school. I was dealing with addiction, with family trauma, with more pressure than most adults could handle. And I was doing it all while the entire world watched and judged and made jokes. Joy opened her mouth as if to interrupt, but Lindsay held up a hand. I'm not finished. You want to talk about personal responsibility? Fine. I take responsibility for my mistakes. I take responsibility for the choices I made, the people I hurt, the opportunities I squandered. But I will not take responsibility for the way the media and the public chose to treat my pain as entertainment. I will not apologize for struggling, and I will not accept being defined by the worst period of my life for the rest of my life. The passion in Lindsay's voice was undeniable, and for the first time since the interview began, Joy looked genuinely uncomfortable rather than just defensive, but more than that, Lindsay continued. I will not sit here and let someone who claims to care about women's issues perpetuate the exact kind of double standard that keeps women from getting second chances. You want to know what message you're sending to every young woman watching this? You're telling them that if they make mistakes, if they struggle, if they're not perfect, they'll spend the rest of their lives paying for it. Sarah Ann looked like she might cry. Sunny Hostin was staring at the table. Even Whoopi seemed at a loss for words. Lindsay took a deep breath, her composure returning. I came here today proud of where I am in my life. I have a successful business, a loving marriage, a beautiful child, and yes, projects I'm passionate about. I've worked hard to get here, to heal, to grow, to become someone I'm proud of. And in 20 minutes, you managed to make me feel like that teenage girl. Again, ashamed and small and unworthy, Joy's voice was barely a whisper. That wasn't my intention. Your intention doesn't matter, Lindsay said firmly. Impact matters. And the impact of what you did here today was to tear down a woman who is trying to build herself up. The impact was to suggest that redemption isn't possible, that growth doesn't count, that mistakes are permanent stains rather than learning opportunities. Lindsay looked directly into the camera one more time. To anyone watching who's ever felt like they don't deserve a second chance, like their past mistakes define them forever, like they should be ashamed of their journey, let me tell you something. You are more than your worst moments. You are more than other people's opinions of you. And you absolutely do not owe anyone shame about your healing process. She turned back to the panel one last time. As for this show, I hope you'll think about what happened here today. I hope you'll think about whether this is really the kind of conversation you want to be having. Whether this is really how you want to treat people who are brave enough to share their stories with you. Joy looked up at Lindsay, and for a moment, something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. Lindsay, Joy said quietly, I'm sorry if, Lindsay repeated, raising an eyebrow. Joy, there's no if here. You hurt me. You tried to humiliate me. You dismissed my work and my growth. A real apology doesn't have conditions. Joy swallowed hard, looking smaller than she had all interview. You're right, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Lindsay nodded slowly. Thank you. That's all I wanted, some basic human decency. With that, Lindsay Lohan walked off the view set, her head held high, leaving behind a studio full of stunned faces and an audience that had just witnessed one of the most raw, honest moments in daytime television history. The cameras kept rolling as the co-hosts sat in uncomfortable silence, unsure how to proceed. Finally, Whoopi cleared her throat and said, "We'll be right back." But everyone knew that nothing would ever quite be the same. What do you think about how celebrities should be treated when they're trying to make a comeback? Should past mistakes define someone forever, or do we all deserve the chance to grow and change? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that dive deep into the moments that matter. Because sometimes, the most important conversations happen when someone finally says, enough is enough.